Another tool that's used in planning is called a storyboard. This has long been a feature of Hollywood in that they would sketch out every scene of a movie or TV show for several reasons. So the producer could see the shot that's required, what the angle positions are going to be, what props are going to be needed. But it's also used in terms of editing the story. The producers will sit down and go through the storyboard and decide maybe there are scenes that could be deleted, don't even need to be shot. It's also used for gathering financial backing for a movie or a TV show. Well, in terms of developing software, we're going to borrow that storyboard idea and sketch out what every screen is going to look like in our application. Now, for most of our applications, at least starting out in this class, they're going to be very simple. They're going to have one screen. So we're going to have one storyboard. Here's a typical storyboard. I'm going to start with the window itself drawn out. We call this, in terms of Microsoft Visual Studio, a form. That's the object that it is, the type of class it is. It's a form object. It's going to have a title bar, a minimize button, a maximize button, and a close button, typical of all windows within Microsoft Windows. To that, I'm going to add some text boxes. A text box is another type of object defined by a text box class. Text boxes are used for gathering input from the user as well as displaying output. The values inside a text box, or the text inside of it, is dynamic. It might change. The user might enter information into it. The program might change the display of the data inside that text box as well. Then I'm going to add in another type of object called a button. And here I have 4 buttons that I'm planning for this project. One to add the 2 numbers together, one to subtract, one to multiply, and one to divide. So a button is another type of class, and these 4 buttons in my application are instances of the button class. And then the third type of object I'm going to add are labels. Labels are static text. The user can't change the text in the label, though our program can. So in code, we can write it in such a way that it will change the display in a label object or label control. So here I'm using labels simply to provide some instructions to the user, and also then to label what the different text boxes are. And then finally, in my storyboard, I'm going to just write down what the names are of these different objects. Now, every object in Visual Studio has a name. In Visual Studio, when you create an object, assigns a name to it as a default. And so our text boxes by default would be named text box 1, text box 2, text box 3. But those aren't very meaningful. And if I get a bunch of text boxes, it might be hard to remember what each one is. And when I'm looking at my code and I see the name text box 2, I really have no idea what that text box is unless I remember what my interface and how I've designed it. So anything I'm going to use in code, I'm going to rename the name of that object. We're going to refer to these 3 text boxes in our code. So I'm going to name them something a little more meaningful. txt first num, txt second num, and txt solution. Now you notice I'm starting all 3 of those with the letters txt. This is called Hungarian notation, and it's a common format that Visual Basic programmers use and other programmers use in terms of creating names of objects. So any text box is going to start with the letters txt. C# users typically don't necessarily do this, but for the purpose of this class, I'm going to use that same Hungarian notation in writing C# objects, and I use this format even in other languages. I find it very helpful in terms of being able to recognize a name in an object and go, oh yeah, that's a text box because it starts with txt. Same with buttons. We're going to name our 4 buttons btn add, btn subtract, and btn multiply, and btn divide. And we're going to start each of those names with the letter btn, which is the Hungarian notation for a button. In terms of our algorithms for those 4 buttons, they're basically all very similar with the exception of the process. We're going to add 2 numbers together, we're going to subtract 2, we're going to multiply 2, and we're going to divide the second from the first. This makes it really easy to code because I can write my code for one button and then copy and paste it to the other 3 buttons and just make a few small changes. So our next step now is going to be to create the interface within Visual Studio, and that'll be the next video.